Sun Tzu says the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. This war would not be one of those. On May 23, 1592, it began. A dense fog hung off the coast of Busan in the early morning, making it impossible to see anything out at sea. The 6-year-old commander of the Pusan garrison, Chang Paul, left the port early for a bit of light hunting on the island of Cholyangdo. Around the afternoon, he was the first to spot the Armada, which he described as covering all the seas. He knew that this was the Japanese invasion that they had been expecting. Chang rushed back to Pusan to raise the alarm and prepare everyone for the worst. Their worst fears were then confirmed by a lighthouse keeper along the coast, and then by a beacon fire on the hill behind Pusan. A column of ships, 90 in number, was creeping from the south. The leading ships of the Armada soon reached the waters off Pusan harbor and dropped anchor. Gyeongsang Left Navy Commander Pak Hong was getting reports from his base at Tongnay. At first it was just 90 as reported. Then he got another report of 120, and then of 150. And as the afternoon waned, he kept hearing about more and more ships, until he stopped receiving reports around 300. As the sun was beginning to fall below the horizon, Pak's heart sunk. They kept coming. Word of the Japanese arrival reached Gyeongsang Right Navy Commander Wang Hyun at his base on Koji Island that same afternoon. At first, he refused to believe any of the news. In a dispatch to his colleague Yi Su-shin, the commander of the Chola Left Navy based at Yusu, Wang reported that the mass of ships was just some grand trade mission from Tsushima. But as time passed and more ships arrived, he was forced to recognize that this was the invasion that they had feared and that they were doomed. Now, brace yourself. Neither one of these naval commanders made any attempt that day or the next to confront the Japanese Armada with the approximately 150 Peninsula battleships under their command. Now, the two men just simply watched and waited and kept sending frantic dispatches back and forth. Their combined forces represented the most formidable defense in the Korean arsenal, and they just sat there in the ports, doing nothing. By nightfall on May 23rd, some 400 ships bearing Konishi Yuki Naga's first contingent had successfully crossed the 70 kilometers from Tsushima and were now crowding the waters off Busan. At 7:30, a single vessel from his armada advanced into the harbor. Aboard was the Christian daimyo of Tsushima, So Yoshitoshi, and with him was the monk Genso, which, if you remember, was a part of the mission to Seoul back in 1589. The two men sent a letter to the Pusan commander, Chang Paul, requesting one last time that the way be cleared so that the armies of Japan could invade China. When no response came, they got their answer and turned the ship around to rejoin the fleet. War was now completely unavoidable. Now, I believe that Yoshitoshi and his father-in-law Konishi Yuki Naga had hoped that such a show of force would make the Koreans back down, accept Hideyoshi's demands, and avoid bloodshed. Chang Paul's lack of response, although in many ways it was one, now made that impossible. Konishi probably thought it was simply the will of Christ that they went ahead and used armed force. For the next several hours, time stopped. The Japanese Armada was offshore motionless, and the Koreans stared at the massive force behind the walls of Pusan Castle. At 4 the next morning, May 24th, the order was given, and the landings began. First onto the beach was So Yoshitoshi and his 5,000 men. He would lead the way as he had been there several times in the past and knew its defenses better than anyone in the Japanese forces. Next ashore was his father-in-law Konishi Yuki Naga, leading a group of some 7,000 men. Now, some sources say that he made a quick prayer that moment for swift victory, as was common for many of the Christian daimyo. They followed a rather unusual banner with a large stuffed rendering of white and black bags, referring to the bags given out with medicine, a reference to the trade Konishi's family was traditionally involved with. There was also several large crucifixes in attendance as well. After him came Matsura, Lord of Hirado, Arima, Omura, and then Goto. A total of almost 19,000 armored men. Most of the men were clad in black armor with red banners and red cloth. They formed up and then split into two groups. Konishi led one group a few kilometers southwest along the front of the harbor at the fort at Tadepo, at the mouth of the Naktong River. The fort's defenders under garrison commander Yoon Hong-sin managed to repel the first wave with a mixture of arrows and large stones being thrown. But the second wave managed to flank, overwhelm them, and then they put them to the sword. So Yoshitoshi, at the same time that all this was happening, led the assault on Pusan Castle himself. He targeted the south gate first, but he started to take casualties. And in the heat of battle, he switched and had his forces attack the north gate instead. There, So Yoshitoshi had his men take the high ground behind the castle and rained a combination of lead and arrows down at the defenders. And eventually, one of his matchlock men managed to kill the commander. The defenders panicked, and the Japanese men on the ground took advantage of the panic and breached the outer walls using bamboo ladders. Now, according to Japanese records, around 8,500 men were killed in the fall of Pusan, with 200 taken as prisoner. Both men, women, and children died in this assault. Among the dead was Changpa's 18-year-old concubine who was found dead next to the commander's body, a blade wound in her stomach, and a bloody knife in her hand. Some sources say even cats and dogs were beheaded, but I've had a really hard time confirming just how true this is. Gyeongsang left Navy Commander Pak Hong, based in the fortress at Tongney, heard about these events from a scouting report. The arrival of the Armada had already shook him. Now, hearing about the complete slaughter of the defenders, he was a complete emotional wreck. He didn't rush to his ships to confront the Japanese. No, actually, he just simply stayed there, quietly making preparations to flee. Not a single shot from Pak Hong or Wang Hyun's cannons, not even an attempt at confronting the Japanese. Now, I imagine that the sight of all those ships just doing nothing brought one hell of a smile to Konishi Yuki Naga's face. After all, he had taken a massive gamble leaving without the escort of the warships that Hideyoshi was building for them. Now, I will even go as far to say that this was probably more confirmation to him that swift action was needed and that the Koreans were unprepared for this war. So that concludes the official start of the war, and it does make you wonder, how much of this inaction was going to continue? Were the Koreans ever going to make a stand? Find out in the next episode of Japan at War. See you then.